everyone, and welcome back to our GRC Summit. I'm Marco Icardi, and I'm driving MetroStream organization in Europe. And today I have the pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Enrico Giovannini. Enrico is full professor of economic statistics and sustainable development at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and he is also professor of sustainable development at Luis University and at the National School of Administration. He is co-founder and director of the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, a coalition of more than 240 organizations established to implement in Italy the United Nations Agenda for 2030. He was Director of Statistics at OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, President of the Italian Statistical Institute, where we met for the first time 12 years ago. And then in 2013 and 14, he was Minister of Labor and Social Policies in the Italian government. In October 2014, the President of the Italian Republic made him Cavaliere di Gran Croce al Merito della Repubblica, the highest ranking honor of the Italian Republic. Enrico is the author of more than 100 articles and 5 books on statistical and economical topics. Well, during these days, Enrico has been one of the members of the task force the Italian government has created to rebuild the country economy for post-COVID-19. First of all, Enrico, thank you for joining us today at the GRC Summit.
Thank you very much, Marco. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and welcome to this conversation to everybody.
Thank you, Enrico. I have a first question for you. You have been suggesting the need of a sustainable development, creating a resilient economy environment. In your book, The Sustainable Utopia, you're talking about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In your opinion, how nations and major companies were prepared to face a challenging crisis like the one we are experiencing now?
Well, let me say that countries had reacted in different ways to this crisis, although the problems were very similar. And there was a general lag between the understanding of the importance of the epidemic outbreak and the actions. Italy was hit among the OECD countries first, and unfortunately, we made some mistakes. Other countries learned from our experience, and this helped a lot others to avoid our mistakes. But on the other hand, Italy has demonstrated an incredible resilience to this crisis, taking tough decisions, especially for the country as a whole, although the epidemic outbreak was focused in some regions. There was a high, I would say, degree of cohesion in reacting to the crisis. And now that we are in phase 2, we see people still following the recommendations to be a way to stay away from the others and so on and so forth. Now, scientists had told us all over the world that the destruction of ecosystems and the excessive contiguity between humans and deep nature was a big risk in terms of risk of pandemic situations. We didn't listen to them. Therefore, we were not prepared, although experts had said to us, be ready. And this tells a lot to the way in which we built a globalization and economic systems, looking for the maximum possible efficiency, but not investing enough in making our organizations resilient and able to anticipate risks. I'm sure that in IT systems, theory and practice, if you do not have contingency plans or redundant systems, if something goes wrong, you would be immediately fired. But for economic system, for social systems, we are not applying the same attitude, the same attention. Therefore, we cut a lot of buffers that could help people, societies, economies to absorb possible shocks, and unfortunately the future will be full of shocks, and therefore we were vulnerable. Anyway, we can learn from this experience and prepare ourselves to bounce forward instead of bouncing back, just trying to go back where we were a few months ago.
Yeah, and on this topic, with your European perspective and knowledge of the country differences, which institutions in your mind were the better and faster responding to the new COVID-19 pandemic situation?
Well, Europe is still in the decision process to make some of the proposals made by the European Commission able to provide their effects. Let me say that I really enjoyed very much the way in which the European Commission had faced this crisis. The previous Commission was slow in reacting, while Ursula von der Leyen's Commission was extremely quick, proposing to European institutions, European central banks, but also the European Council, a quick reaction, not only in economic terms, but also in social terms. This is a big change vis-à-vis the past experiences. The activation of new instruments, including instruments to provide funds for facing the medical emergency, but also the social emergency in an area where countries are responsible for actions, was another important change vis-à-vis the past. Now, in the discussion at European level, there is the establishment of this recovery fund. And after the discussion between Germany and France, which was also extended to other countries, we hope that the Union will take a bold decision to build this recovery fund. To do what? And again, here the Commission has been extremely forward-looking and smart. They proposed a plan for building a more resilient, sustainable, and just Europe, trying to embrace all dimensions, economic, social, and environmental. And I'm very pleased that according to the declarations of the President of the Commission, the intention is to stick to Green New Deal, great digital transformation, innovation, social cohesion. So the topics that are really the most relevant to face this crisis, which is a systemic crisis. Learning from other countries, for example, US, we know that the federal system was built as a new answer instead of having state-based answers to crisis. And I think that Europe has finally learned that this is the way to go.
Well, thank you for those insights. Italy has been one of the most affected countries so far by this crisis. You are a member of the task force the Italian government has created to rebuild the country's economy for post-COVID-19. What are the priorities and actions for a response to the crisis you have suggested to adopt?
Well, the task force is still working. It's a task force made of experts in different fields. We were asked, first of all, to help the government to put together data and analysis on how to reopen the different economic sectors. And then, of course, the decision was made by the government. Now we are focusing on economic, social, environmental policies, institutional reforms in order to make Italy more resilient, sustainable, and just. Because we know that the medical crisis now is becoming an economic crisis that will lead to a possible social crisis and therefore an institutional crisis. This is where the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, agreed by all countries in the world in 2015, represents a great compass to decide where to go and how to go. First of all, we should avoid the temptation, which is strong also in psychological terms, to the idea that we need to go back where we were. Italy was not in good shape 3 months ago in terms of inequalities, in terms of pollution, in terms of tax evasion. Therefore, these policies that are going to be implemented, also thanks to the European funds, need to think in transformative terms, not only in economic terms. Over the last 4 years, I led a research project with the European Commission, with the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, to build a new policy framework based on the concept of vulnerability and resilience. And in particular, the transformative resilience that we have to really stimulate as much as we can. And we ended with a new policy framework that tends to reclassify economic, social, environmental policies according to 5 main aims: policies that protect, policies that promote, that prevent, that prepare, and that transform. Unfortunately, we know that the COVID-19 is not going to be the last shock or a unique shock that will hit our countries. As someone said, COVID-19 crisis is a climate change crisis in time lapse, which means accelerated. And Ursula von der Leyen recently wrote a tweet saying, one day we will find the vaccine against the coronavirus, but there is no vaccine for fighting against climate change. Therefore, the decisions that we have to make now have to be designed in order to cover all the 5 dimensions that I mentioned before. And the most recent bill prepared by the government, 55 billion euros, a massive injection of money in the Italian economy and society, will now be reviewed also by the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, the organization that I'm leading, according to the 5 dimensions that I mentioned before. But the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development can represent a common ground for both public policies and private companies. And we know that large companies, a lot of medium-sized companies, have already embraced this agenda within the Global Compact and other business associations around the world, and especially in Europe. This is a great opportunity also because sustainable finance, which is the most dynamic component of the financial sector, even now, will look at companies able to not only reduce their impact on environment and ensure profitability, but also those companies who will take care of social sustainability. First and foremost, the health of their workers. So I see that in a moment in which risks are perceived correctly as much larger than before, policies for both economic, social, environmental domains will look at sustainability as a common ground for solutions.
Thank you for your insights, and we are very well aligned. Yesterday we were talking about sustainable finance in the same way, and I think vulnerability and resilience that you mentioned before are two key areas to be addressed. Now, how to get out of the crisis and ensure to reinforce a more distributed sustainability, because I'm going back to Italy and taking into consideration the small and medium business that is for Italy the backbone of our economy. I think we have an opportunity to reinforce also this part of the economy here in Europe.
Yes, I agree with you, Marco. According to recent polls, 1/3 of Italian companies uh, think that the business will be the same as before the crisis or even better. 1/3 say, well, we will be affected, but not big issues. We will survive and we will continue. And 1/3 feel that they are at risk of continuing their business. We have too many small enterprises. Therefore, I hope that one of the results of this crisis will be an increase in the average size of our companies. But on the other hand, I hope that a lot of new companies will come into the market, eventually reinforcing the international network and especially European networks of companies who are already ready to jump into a different world. We saw that some Italian companies were extremely quick to change their production systems. They adapted immediately to new conditions, even in the services sector. So the strength of Italy is not only art and culture, but also creativity. And we saw that a lot of Italian entrepreneurs have already demonstrated great creativity in facing this crisis. Of course, we need that the policies support this kind of transformation. We need a financial sector that is able to drive this process towards more sustainable and long-term actions. But don't forget that Italians have a large wealth, and the success of a public bond just issued this week, a lot of private money was decided to go to subscribe this new bond, demonstrate that Italians are ready to invest in their future. From this point of view, we have an additional opportunity at Italian level and at European level. The green bonds were already extremely successful in several countries, including Italy. It's now time to go for SDG bonds, the Sustainable Development Goals bonds that can align private saving to investments in the direction of the 2030 agenda. Enel, a very innovative and big company in Italy, has already issued an SDG bond, and we know that at European level, the Commission is also thinking about this possible new tool in order to bring private saving into a big project to change and improve not only economic but also social and environmental outcomes coming from this crisis.
So also a good opportunity to change and direct our economy in the future with different goals.
It's an historical opportunity, Marco.
Yes.
It is an historical opportunity. I was talking to the president of the Italian Institute for Medical Research, which of course was at the center of the discussions on how to tackle the crisis. And he said to me an interesting point, that after each and every revolution, let's think about the French Revolution, the temptation is to go back to the ancien regime, to the old way of doing things. But normally, this kind of repression let's say, of the new tendencies don't stand for a long time. We have to resist to this temptation. Just talking to a very important person in the European Commission a few days ago, he told me, well, after the crisis, for 15 days, there were businesses telling us, give us our complete freedom in terms of environmental policies and social constraints, and we will do great things. The Commission answered, is not the way in which we want to go. On the contrary, we believe that this is an historical opportunity to change the business model, the development model. And in 15 days, the initial pressures are gone. So I think that there is a great opportunity here if we resist to the idea to react in an automatic mode with the automatic pilot. And this is what a lot of companies are fortunately doing, forgetting about the usual reaction functions and thinking in new terms.
Yeah, I fully agree. Let me jump to another topic that I'm really focus on. You, as a statistician, have been working always analyzing data and using the insights to take decisions, important decisions for the country, not only. Now, with an extended usage of the artificial intelligence, there is a focus on ethics, integrity, data privacy protection. We at MetroStream think that there should be a GRC for artificial intelligence. What's your view on these topics?
Well, indeed, data represents the new oil, let's say, intangible oil for the 21st century. When I stepped down as Minister of Labor and Social Policies, Ban Ki-moon asked me to chair an international panel on the data revolution for sustainable development, which helped also in shaping up the 2030 agenda. And we clearly identified in 2014 all the opportunities and risks coming from the data revolution. This is where we need not to be afraid or scared by data. On the contrary, but we need to find a better way to rebalance the public and private roles in this area. The crisis demonstrated the importance once more of having data at a granular level in order to prevent the crisis, the outbreak, and also to be able to treat in a right way those who are affected by the virus. We hope, of course, that a vaccine will be found as soon as possible. But as I said before, we know that other pandemics will come. So we need to think about the governance of information. And again, Europe is maybe the most advanced area of the world with a recent regulation on data privacy, but also the use of data for economic and social reasons. And we need an international agreement to deal with this issue. We know that there are cybersecurity problems. We know that there are cyber attacks that can also lead for political purposes. Therefore, we know that the world is quite wild, but this is exactly where multilateralism is needed, not only on environmental issues, on climate crisis issues, on economic issues, but also in terms of data management. And let me add one point that we saw in practice during this crisis in Italy, but also elsewhere. Data sharing should be part of the corporate social responsibility policies of companies. I'm not saying that they have to give all their data for free, but they have to ask themselves, how can I share, at least partially, the wealth that is coming from what I have or what I know? This is normally done when there are crises, when there are uh, other dramatic events, while this should become a systematic way of thinking. And again, private-public partnerships could be extremely beneficial for everybody, because everybody can benefit from a more digitalized society also at global level.
Enrico, there are dozens of questions on your topics that you are covering from the audience, and let me share or ask you some of the most important you were addressing now. One topic is you have been talking about policies, no? How to set up a proper governance across different countries, and the European Commission will have the task to coordinate and classify different policies. So ensuring a proper adoption, but also coordination. What's your view on this?
I really welcome the last few lines of the final conclusions of the European Council a few weeks ago, that was quite unnoticed by the press, where the Council calls the Commission to table a proposal to transform the Commission into an institution able to manage crisis. The European Commission was not designed for this purpose. The way in which the European Union was built was to give to the Commission the role of a medium long-term actor, providing proposals for legislation to make the single market working, and so on and so forth, not to manage crisis. But now everybody recognizes that this is necessary. I made this point in 2016 in a meeting, in a conference at the European Commission, but the Commission at the time was not ready to think in these terms. But as I said before, even looking at the way in which other confederations, federations, unions were built, unfortunately, countries are ready to give up some of their powers only under the pressure of crisis. This is wrong, but maybe it's human, I don't know. So I welcome this now, or this new demand to the Commission to think in different terms about the role that the Commission has to play. It's more similar to what the European Central Bank and normally central banks do. So I'm optimistic about the fact that, unfortunately for us, this shock that hit so many people and the economy in a so dramatic way will be the engine to change our institutions. But what I said is that I hope that this will also happen at international level, at multilateral level. So I am very sorry that some countries, US, first of all, is fighting against this multilateral approach, which is notwithstanding mistakes that could be done by international organizations, is the only way to tackle global problems.
Yeah, and let me add on this, because I think there is another question from globalization and the entire connected world where we can coordinate the policies. In your optimistic view, we are in reality in some cases moving to a more local, national control economy. And so what are the implications on going into this direction?
If people realize, as they correctly do, that the future is going to be quite difficult, and the shocks will be repeated over time, eventually coming from different reasons and so on, the temptation could be to rebuild walls, to isolate countries as done in the past. And we know that this can lead to dramatic events, wars, and so on. This is where political leadership, but also business leadership, is so key. Some people reported that the change in the attitude of Mrs. Merkel vis-à-vis the European response to the crisis was stimulated by the fact that the business leaders, especially from the automotive sector, told her, look, large part of our cars are built in Italy. If you give up with Italy, this will be a disaster for us. So in an interconnected world, the interests, the domestic interests, need to be balanced with the general interest of people and also companies. This is why, by the way, the fathers of the European Union pushed to have a more economic and financial integration, knowing that it would be much more difficult to disband this kind of system, would be more costly, and this could be a way to pave the way towards a more political convergence and union. This is the experience of all regions in the world. But at supranational level, at international level, we have to understand, again, even more than in the past, that our interest lies in the coordination of policies at international level, like for the pandemic.
And this, I think, is a key message also to all our GRC practitioners and the business leaders that are following us. There are still a number of questions that we would like to pose to you, but this has been a fantastic input for all of us, Enrico. Thank you so much for sharing today your ideas and view on how to face the current situation, but also look forward in an optimistic view. Really, thank you from all of us for your great contribution to the summit. Appreciate your time and participation. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Marco, and good afternoon to everybody.